Hello everyone. Today's case took me down a rabbit hole that I was not expecting when a man gets back together with the mother of his child and then mysteriously goes missing not long after. 33-year-old Jeramy Burt was born June 18th of 1973 to his mother Cheryl, a school bus driver, and his father Van Burt. He also had a sister named Katrina and a brother named Shane. The family grew up in American Falls, Idaho, a small town along the edge of the Snake River and the American Falls Reservoir, with a population of around 4,500 people. Jeramy would eventually graduate from American Falls High School in 1991. Following high school, Jeramy joined the Navy and served in the Gulf War. While stationed in Japan, he would eventually marry a woman he met there named Rena. But after coming back to the U.S., Jeramy realized that Rena didn't want to move to the U.S., so the marriage was over with at that point. Rena staying in Japan and Jeramy coming back. However, they didn't end up finalizing the divorce because apparently the marriage wasn't even recognized in Japan or something along those lines, so essentially they just didn't do anything about it. Jeramy was said to be a spontaneous young man that loved hunting, fishing, and the outdoors. He was also said to be very stubborn, his mother Cheryl saying, and I quote, "You could tell him that if he went out there and climbed that tree, he might fall out and break his arm. He would go out there one day, he would fall out and break his arm, and he still wouldn't believe you." End quote. Eventually, Jeramy would go on to fall in love with another woman named Kim George. Kim was born June 23rd of 1975 in Salt Lake City, Utah, to her parents Dan and Janet from Pocatello, Idaho. She also had 6 siblings. At the time, Kim describing Jeramy as tall, outgoing, funny, and handsome. And his cousin David said that he fell for Kim hook, line, and sinker. The two would eventually move to Boise, Idaho, because there were better opportunities there. Jeramy was actually a roofer, and there were a lot more job opportunities at the time. Kim had also just finished school right before the move. In 2002, Kim ended up getting pregnant, and so her and Jeramy decided that they wanted to get married. But if you remember, Jeramy was still legally married to his first wife from Japan, so he needed to get a divorce lawyer, which would lead him to hiring a woman named Jeanie Braun, who was said to be the best divorce attorney in Idaho. And as the two began to spend a lot more time together since they were working on Jeramy's divorce, they began to get a lot closer, realizing that they both had similar pasts in the military. Despite everything seemingly working out, Kim would actually end up having a miscarriage, which destroyed Jeramy because he wanted to be a father so badly. But they would go on to try again, and 6 months later, Kim would again be pregnant. During this time, Jeramy was still going through his divorce, and he actually started to become very infatuated with his lawyer, Jeanie, which he would talk a lot about to his best friend, Greg Reno. And that was a twist I didn't expect in this. Right before Jeramy and Kim got married, Jeanie was actually taking Jeramy out on expensive dates, buying him expensive gifts. And Kim started to notice, women notice things like that, but Kim was also 3 months pregnant, and she wanted to believe in her heart that they were just friends. And shockingly, Jeramy still went ahead and married Kim, despite having this secret mistress that was kind of like a sugar mom in a way, because she was taking him out again on these expensive dates, buying him expensive, items. But at the same time, it didn't seem that secret because he was spending a lot of time with her and he was telling his best friend about her. Jeramy also allegedly told his best friend that he wasn't even sure if he should get married, but he felt like he needed to. Which, let me just tell you right now, is never a good idea to marry someone if you're not 100% committed. And I definitely also never recommend staying with someone because you have a child with them if the relationship is not working out. But things, seemed really great between Jeramy and Kim. From what I seen described, they were one of those couples that was just extremely passionate. They loved passionately, but they also fought passionately. Don't know if you want to call that toxic, some would. We don't know all the details into the relationship, the everyday of it. But from all accounts, it seems like, they were kind of meant to be in a way. Yet Jeramy also was very infatuated with this lawyer. And clearly it seems like he had other things on his mind. According to how his mother Cheryl felt about Jeanie, she said, and I quote, "I think this woman preys on men. She knew Jeramy was vulnerable and she preyed on him." End quote. 7 months later, Kim would give birth to a daughter that they named Mackenzie. And Jeramy absolutely adored this little girl. From all accounts, he was an amazing father, calling Mackenzie his perfect little girl. Jeramy was still, however, continuing his secret relationship with Jeanie during this time. And just 3 weeks postpartum, Kim had finally had enough, and she ended up confronting Jeramy about his affair and moving out of the house. Life, wasn't as perfect as the pictures on the screen. And they did separate, however, they did continue to see each other. Remember, they had a brand new baby together, and they seemed to spend a lot of time together still despite separating. And they actually only end up living apart for around 1 year. By June of 2006, they decided to start working on their relationship again. Jeramy and his father Van, who worked in the roofing business that they owned with him, ended up moving into one of the apartment complexes on the 2200 block of Hervey Street that they'd actually helped build after a unit came up for rent. Jeramy would then invite Kim and Mackenzie to move in with them as well. Now, there was mixed stories about whether they did this for convenience sake because of Mackenzie or if they were truly working on the relationship, but it seems like, according to Kim, they were working on the relationship, and that's why they moved back in. Either way, after Kim and Mackenzie moved in, their relationship began to flourish again, it seems, to the point that Kim was even considering wearing her wedding ring again. In February of 2007, Jeramy and Mackenzie ended up taking a trip to American Falls, Idaho, to visit friends and family. They spent a few days there, they went to Pocatello, but by February 11th, Jeramy was packing up him and Mackenzie's stuff, and they were preparing to head the 3-hour trip back to Boise. His mother Cheryl tried to convince them to stay a little bit longer, spend another day or so there. Jeramy was self-employed. He had his own business, so he could spend extra time places if he really wanted to, but he seemed to already be set on going back. His sister was also sleeping at the time because she had gotten back late from work, and so she also didn't get to say goodbye to her brother or her niece that day, which is very unfortunate because this is the last time that they would ever see Jeramy again. Jeramy and Mackenzie would arrive back to the apartment by that evening. Van was home, however, Kim was on a week-long training program for work in Las Vegas. After arriving back, Jeramy would end up calling Kim to make sure that she arrived in Vegas safely. And the two talked for a bit and everything seemed normal. Kim even tried to convince Jeramy to drive over to Vegas so that they could spend Valentine's Day together because she was going to be there during Valentine's Day. But unfortunately, with his work schedule, he didn't think it would be good timing. While on the phone call with Kim around 10:10 p.m., Jeramy's mother Cheryl ended up calling him to check on him if him and Mackenzie had gotten back okay before she went to bed. He ended up telling his mother that Kim was on the other line, and so she said she loved him and hoped he had a good night, and that call ended. Again, according to his mother, everything seemed normal in the phone call. Now, according to Van, this is where things got interesting, because it seems like either during this phone call or after the phone call, Jeramy was on his computer for a while. He then went and showered and then put on some nicer clothing than the clothing he was wearing. I think he specifically said that Jeramy put on a turtleneck and a button-up shirt. He then put on his jacket because, remember, it was February, it was cooler out, and told his father he was going to be heading over to his best friend Greg Reno's house so that they could talk about some upcoming plans for hunting. After this, Jeramy ended up placing a call to Greg. However, Greg never answered the phone. And before leaving, Jeramy ended up asking his father to put Mackenzie to bed, and then he headed out the door, getting in Kim's car and driving off. As morning came, Van wasn't too alarmed when Jeramy didn't return home. Remember, Van had seen Jeramy leave the house in a nicer outfit that he normally wouldn't wear, so Van thought that maybe Jeramy had gone to a party or something, crashed at someone's place because he couldn't drive home after drinking, because the outfit he left the house in wasn't something he would have just worn to go over to Greg's house to, chat about hunting with his buddy. But as evening came and Jeramy still didn't return home that next day, Van started to wonder if Jeramy had possibly gone out in the wilderness somewhere, which is apparently something he had done before. He was self-employed, he could take off time, but in my opinion, his schedule didn't seem as flexible as just that, because he didn't want to stay back at his mom's house later. He didn't want to go and see Kim in Vegas because of work. But apparently this was something he had done before, taken off weeks, gone hunting, gone camping, stuff around those lines. However, you'd think if he had also gone camping or hunting, he would have brought gear with him. But again, family doesn't always think the worst when someone just doesn't appear home. What is strange, though, is that according to Greg, Jeramy didn't come to his house that night because he had missed his phone call and didn't get that phone call till the morning when he woke up. So was Jeramy's plan to go to Greg's house? But then maybe it fell through because he didn't answer, so he went somewhere else. But clearly he dressed up in an outfit he wouldn't, wear to go talk to a buddy. So where was he planning to go? Was he possibly going to talk to Greg about other plans that he had? Because Greg was his best friend. It was someone he confided in all the time, especially with the Jeanie stuff. So is it possible he wasn't going to see Greg at all and was maybe just calling him to chat on the way, maybe tell him like, hey, you're my cover story, when he was supposed to be going somewhere else? Now we're going to jump back a little bit to earlier on February 12th, so the day after Jeramy was last seen, because he was last seen on the night of the 11th. So it's now the 12th. And Kim had a very busy day at the seminar in Las Vegas, so she wasn't able to be on her cell phone or chat with anyone. As she got back to her hotel room, her phone ended up ringing and the caller ID said it was Jeramy. Kim ended up picking up the phone saying, hey babe, but the caller on the other end ended up immediately hanging the phone up. Thinking the phone maybe lost signal or something, Kim then tried to call Jeramy back. However, Jeramy didn't answer and it went straight to voicemail. So after that, Kim thought, maybe there was some signal issues or something, and she just went on with the rest of her night. However, things would start to get very strange when around 2 p.m. the next day on February 13th, when Kim would receive a message from Jeramy's phone saying, and I quote, "We need to talk," end quote, which is an infamous text message that would make anyone's stomach turn. Now, Kim was in class at that point, so she couldn't respond to it. So it wasn't until around 5 p.m. that she got to respond to that "we need to talk" message. So just imagine sitting there for hours, that churning in your head, like, what does he need to talk about? That is the worst message anyone can receive, honestly. But when Kim was finally out of the seminar and back with her cell phone, she had gotten 17 other messages other than that "we need to talk" message during that time period. All of these came from Jeramy's phone number, with messages reading such as, "Goodbye, Kim. Good luck with your life. I'll come get Mackenzie later. And don't contact me. I'm leaving." In another text message, whoever was on the other end on Jeramy's phone, whether it was Jeramy or someone else possibly, they used some very personal catchphrases that Jeramy would use, such as when he talked to his daughter, he'd always say, "How did you get so cute?" That was something that Jeramy always said to his daughter. However, in hindsight, the family feels like the insertion of these messages was just too perfect, as if someone was possibly on the other end of these text messages pretending to be Jeramy and trying to convince everybody that it was Jeramy by using these catchphrases. Because these initial messages were just so out of character for Jeramy. Remember, everything seemed completely normal on the 11th. He had just been at his mother's house with his sister and seen all his friends that entire weekend, and nothing seemed off for the most part. Then he went back home with his daughter. His dad said everything seemed pretty normal. He talked to his mom on the phone, he talked to Kim on the phone. Everything seemed normal when he talked to them on the phone. Remember, from all accounts, Jeramy was absolutely in love with Kim. He'd been with her for 10 years, they'd had a child together, they'd broken up, they had just gotten back together, and things seemed better than ever. And the only reason they had broken up in the first place wasn't because Jeramy wanted to, it was because Kim wanted to, because she was over being cheated on. Who knows if Kim had never done anything, if they would have ever even broken up, because Jeramy loved Kim. So for him to now, all of a sudden, after leaving on the night of the 11th and then never being seen again, to start messaging her saying goodbye, like, have a good life, I'm not coming back, like all of these strange things, it just didn't make sense. And on top of that, his entire family could never see Jeramy running away. It was completely out of character for him. And that is what these text messages seemed like he was running off somewhere and basically telling everyone, like, peace out, have a good life. Jeramy's entire life was in Idaho. His daughter, who he loved more than anything in the world, was in Idaho. Now, there was one message that said, "I'll come get Mackenzie later," but where was he going? It didn't make sense that he would run off, considering he had all his family and friends in Idaho, and again, seemingly nothing was off. Now again, people do go off and unalive themselves, and some people don't notice signs. But why would he then send a message saying he was going to come get Mackenzie later if that was his plan to go on and unalive himself? That doesn't make sense. Again, Jeramy's life seemed to be going better than ever at this point. Like, this was like the highest point of his life. He had a home. He had a good paying job. He worked for himself. He made apparently like 6 figures. He had a daughter that he absolutely loved. He was getting back with the mother of his child, who he also absolutely loved, and things seemed to be going very well with that. Everything seemed on the up and up. So why would he just disappear? Why would he want to leave all of that? Now, when Kim first seen these messages, from what she said, she felt very betrayed. Seeing that "we need to talk," and then him basically saying he's leaving her. This had already happened before, He'd been cheating on her, she left, and they broke up. So it kind of just brought all those emotions back to her. So at first she was thinking, okay, maybe it's possible, I don't know, for whatever reason, he'd been cheating on her behind her back for, a year, basically, while she was pregnant. Maybe something else was going on like that, and now he was the one that wanted to leave. She had all these thoughts at first of, this possibly could be true. And so she was responding to these text messages that were coming from Jeramy's phone, and she was actually getting responses throughout that entire evening, which, remember, is the 13th now. But in hindsight, she now says that these messages didn't feel very Jeramy to her, and she began to wonder if it was truly Jeramy on the other end of the line. So Kim began to call Jeramy's phone number over and over and over again, but whoever was on the other end of the line refused to pick up. until one time the person did pick up the phone, but all she heard was a very loud sigh, and then they ended the call, which in my opinion is a huge red flag, because if Jeramy was on the other end of the line, why would he just answer the phone and just have a conversation on the phone with her instead of sending all these text messages? Just very, very strange. From there, Kim ended up calling Van to explain the strange situation to him and see if he knew anything, because they all lived together, and, you know, if Jeramy was Jeramy on the other end of the line, you'd think he would have been home, and apparently Jeramy was very forthcoming, so he would have told, you know, his best friend Greg, would have told his father if something was up. But again, at this point in time, Van had just assumed that Jeramy was off maybe hunting or, you know, out in the wilderness somewhere with his buddies or something. So Van also didn't know what was going on, which made this even strange situation even more confusing. Van saying, and I quote, "When Kim told me about the text messages, I thought, no way. I don't know how many times he ever text messaged anyone. If he had something to say to you, he said it and he meant it." End quote. As I just said, why wouldn't Jeramy answer the phone if Kim was calling him? Because remember, this was 2007 this was happening. Especially people back then, they preferred to talk on the phone, if anything. A lot of people were into text messaging like nowadays, where now no one wants to talk on the phone and everyone just wants to text. Back then, talking on the phone was a very normal thing still. And someone like Jeramy, he would rather even talk in person, it seems like, than even talk on a phone. He would want to say it to your face. So why would he switch up so drastically then? This was completely out of character for him to not just answer the phone. He had just talked to her the night or so before, so now why is he refusing to talk to her on the phone? It's very weird. It was very out of character for Jeramy to be hiding behind text messages. Unless it wasn't Jeramy on the other end of the line, because the person, if it wasn't Jeramy, couldn't answer the phone because it would give them away. And again, from all accounts, for whatever reason, if Jeramy was going to break up with Kim, which seemed, again, also very out of character for him, you think he would have done it to her face. He wouldn't hide behind text messages. Well, since Van didn't know anything, Kim ended up calling Jeramy's cousin David, because he also told his cousin David everything. And if he was going to break up with Kim, he would have chatted with his best friend and his cousin about this kind of stuff. But again, just like with Van, David had no clue what Kim was talking about, because none of that made sense to David either. This entire situation that Jeramy was trying to break up with Kim over text message and not answering the phone, and Van hadn't seen him in days either. This was all weird to David, because David had just seen him a couple days prior when he was in American Falls. They all hung out together there. They actually spent the weekend playing cards together, and then they went over to an area called Pocatello to play pool with some more friends. But there was one situation that stuck out to David, because when they were at the Odyssey bar in Pocatello, hanging out with friends and playing pool, David said at one point Jeramy tried to get him alone to go talk to him off, you know, in a different room where it was more private. However, David was waiting for an ex-girlfriend to arrive so that they could hang out. And so he didn't want to be off somewhere and then not run into her. So him and Jeramy never got to talk then. And Jeramy ended up leaving on his own and actually attempted to call David the next morning. However, David didn't answer. So the two actually never ended up having whatever conversation that Jeramy wanted to have. Now, once Kim alerted everyone that something was clearly up here, because Van hadn't seen him in days, all these weird text messages are coming in to Kim's phone, the family and friends all began to immediately try to call Jeramy as well, because there's no way that Jeramy wouldn't have answered his mother, his sister, his brother, all these people, his best friend even, like all these people are people he would have responded to, even if he didn't want to talk to Kim for whatever reason. However, despite phone calls and text messages, no one else got any responses from Jeramy's phone. According to Jeramy's friends and family, those text messages coming from Jeramy's phone to Kim also seemed as if someone was trying to convince them that if Jeramy was sending them. On top of that, as I keep saying, if Jeramy was going to break up with Kim, it didn't make sense that he wouldn't speak to the rest of the family. And also, why would he leave behind his daughter that he loved so much? On top of that, why would he run off without even preparing? That's another thing that just doesn't make sense to me. David would end up telling Kim to file a police report the moment she got back from Boise, because she was heading right back to figure out what was going on. But when she got back to Boise, she also realized that Jeramy had taken her car. So she ended up calling the police, reporting him missing along with her vehicle, which was a red 2003 Mercury Cougar. But the issue with this is, in doing that, this actually put out a grand theft charge against Jeramy in a bolo. Which on one hand is good if you're trying to find someone, but also, like, He didn't really steal her car, they were together, but also her car was now missing and he seemingly ran off and broke up with her. So that's a bit of an issue, But police actually ended up seeing all those text messages that came to Kim's phone from Jeramy's. And so when police read them, they basically didn't consider him as a missing person, but that he went off on his own free will. But as I said, Kim was pretty conflicted over these text messages. At first she thought, maybe there was a possibility he had run off with another woman again. It wasn't something as horrible as the man she loved being missing. But once she got back home, she started to realize that there were a lot of Jeramy's belongings left there that he would need if he was going to leave or go off hunting or something like that. His computer was there, all of his clothing was there, his hunting supplies, including his prized hunting bow, which he had recently purchased and was just obsessed with. Those were things that he would not have left behind. So things started to really not add up now. As I always say, it's always a huge red flag when someone goes missing or goes off somewhere and doesn't bring any of their belongings, especially personal belongings that they would need to run away. Given the fact that he was self-employed, though, it would make it easier to skip town compared to some other, situations. But as I said, he didn't have any beef with the rest of his family. He had just been with them and having a great time. He spoke to them all almost daily. He lived with his father. His daughter was left behind. None of this made sense. But police weren't really looking still. So since they weren't getting any answers, the rest of the family ended up traveling from American Falls to Boise. And they ended up going and talking to the police, urging them that these text messages and his disappearance just didn't make sense. There was some things, though, that made people question things, because Jeramy actually wasn't great with managing his money despite making six figures, as I said. So he often did have troubles with his money, which, money troubles is something that can set people off. However, the family would inform police that he had a very complicated and possibly dangerous relationship with a woman named Jeanie Braun, a woman that I mentioned earlier, that Jeramy had spent a lot of time with and become infatuated with, that was buying him fancy dinners and expensive toys, and was the woman that caused him and Kim to break up. So let's dive a little deeper into Jeramy's relationship with Jeanie. It would turn out that not long after Mackenzie was born, Jeanie would be arrested for forging a judge's signature in a child custody case. She'd be charged with forgery, intimidation of a witness, and destruction of evidence. And Jeanie had allegedly told Jeramy about all her evil doings. And Jeramy, finally realizing maybe she wasn't the perfect woman for him, decided he wanted to help take her down. Jeramy apparently told Kim all of this stuff. Even though they were separated, he divulged all of this information to Kim secretly, to the point that he decided he was going to go undercover and secretly record his conversations with Jeanie and still pretend to be dating her so that he could try to get evidence of her admitting to forging her signature on those documents. During one of those conversations, Jeramy actually recorded Jeanie allegedly trying to bribe him not to testify, which is how she got that intimidation of a witness charge. And those recorded conversations are actually what would eventually get Jeanie convicted, leading to her disbarment, 1 year in jail, and 14 years of probation. But despite all of that, you'd think that Jeramy would finally learn his lesson and run away from this crazy lady. But for one reason or another, I don't know what kind of magic coochie Jeanie had, he just couldn't stay away from her. And as soon as Jeanie got out of prison, she was bringing lunches to Jeramy and his father Van at their work sites. However, once Jeramy wanted to rekindle things with Kim and moved her and their daughter into the home they were living at, it seems like Jeramy possibly started to have other feelings towards Jeanie. And he actually told Jeanie that she couldn't come to the house anymore because he was trying to work things out with Kim. Despite that warning, Jeanie didn't listen, of course, and one day she actually showed up at their house just moments before Kim was going to arrive home from work, and Jeramy was pissed and he told Kim to get the hell out of there. Now, one way or another, Kim ended up finding out that Jeanie showed up at their house, and Jeramy told her, yeah, she did, and I told her to get the hell out of here. So Kim was now also pissed, and so she called Jeannie's parole officer because I'm pretty sure there was like a restraining order or something there because he was, the witness that got her arrested and charged and put in jail. So there was they weren't supposed to be seeing each other, but they were basically. And so Kim called the parole officer and she thought there was some violation going on here. And I'm not sure if that actually did anything though. But I know eventually Jeanie would head off to Utah. But I mean, hey, Jeramy was a big boy and he could make decisions for himself, it seems. And he was the one that seemed to have welcomed her back into his life, despite all of what had just happened. Now, hearing all of this, police were, of course, like, that's a lot. But unfortunately, they had their hands tied because they had no evidence and there was no signs of foul play anywhere. All they could really do was interview people. But the family's worries increased when Mackenzie's birthday came and went, and Jeramy was still nowhere to be seen. Because again, Mackenzie was his life. And for him not to show up for her birthday meant that something very, very bad had happened to him. It wouldn't be until 3 months later, on May 18th of 2007, when a cowboy riding horseback herding his cattle in the remote Idaho desert, 100 kilometers south of Boise, would stumble upon evidence something truly awful might have happened to Jeramy. Kim's vehicle would end up being found completely burned down and torched, sitting among the wilderness, half a mile from the nearest dirt road. And as you can see from the photo, the interior was completely gone. An officer said even the steel belting on the tires had been burned through. Whoever had done this had also even removed the license plates, but had thankfully left the VIN number, so the car was still able to be traced by police. And when they ended up tracing the VIN number, they ended up finding that it had been reported stolen when Kim had called into the police reporting it, 3 months prior. Finding that vehicle in that state truly set it in the family that something extremely horrible had happened to Jeramy. Police ended up examining the vehicle, hoping to find some kind of evidence. However, it was so badly burned that nothing was found. A 3-mile radius was also searched with horseback, ATVs, and on foot, and still not one scrap of evidence was found anywhere, making them really think now that someone was truly trying to destroy any kind of evidence here, and they did do it because nothing was found. This is really what kind of launched police into actively searching and looking for Jeramy now. When police ended up looking at Jeramy's bank account, they noticed it hadn't been touched since February 11th, the last day he was seen alive. However, after he left home that night, he actually ended up using it twice. There were 2 transactions. One transaction was made in Boise around 10:30 p.m., which I find interesting. So I'm not totally sure how this whole timeline works, because if he was on his phone at 10:10 p.m. with his mother, how did he have time to shower, be on his computer, get dressed, talk to his dad, and then leave, and then make a transaction in Boise at 10:30? I'm really curious where exactly that transaction was made, because the second transaction was made at a Chevron gas station in Mountain Home, which is around a 48-minute drive or 43 miles from Boise. It was also towards the direction where Kim's vehicle would eventually be found torched. And that second transaction didn't happen until around midnight. And there was a lot of questions surrounding that, besides the fact that if it was only a 48-minute drive, what happened in that time frame, because there was an hour and a half period between the 2 transactions. On top of that, why would Jeramy drive to an area he was unfamiliar with in the middle of the night? Police also discovered that there was ongoing use of Jeramy's phone until February 14th. As we know, Kim was receiving constant text messages from Jeramy's phone in the days after his disappearance. There was noted to be 36 entries in the call log, but most of these were to Jeramy's own number, which meant that someone was constantly calling the voicemail. Which is interesting to me because we know his family and friends were constantly trying to call him and leaving messages to him. So whoever had his phone was constantly checking the messages, listening to all these voicemails that his family and friends were leaving him, which is just so messed up. Again, so out of character for Jeramy to listen to these calls and then not respond to anyone. The other calls were said to show 1-minute call times, indicating that whoever was on the other end of Jeramy's phone was calling people and then immediately hanging up, which also matches Kim's stories where the person didn't answer the calls every time she called, but then there was that one call where the person answered and just, sighed. There was, however, one specific call on February 13th that is especially strange and police have never been able to figure out and solve. Because there was one call to a payphone in Mountain Home, Idaho, which lasted 6 to 7 minutes, but I've also seen mixed stories that it was a 20-minute phone call. However, there were no cameras in the area of that payphone, so it's unknown who placed that call or received that call at that payphone. But that is a big mystery to this, and that is a very big part of this evidence that could lead to solving this case. However, there's no video footage, so that's a big problem. I don't know if anyone was in that area at that time, may know something. If you do, please say something, because whoever was calling that payphone and whoever was receiving that call knows something. Now, of course, Jeanie denies having anything to do with Jeramy's disappearance. Last I read, she was residing in St. George, Utah, where she owned a nutrition food business. But Jeramy's father, Van, insisted that Jeramy and Jeanie had actually been seeing each other up until his disappearance. So I don't know when exactly that run-in happened where he told her to get out of there, but according to Van, who, worked with him, lived with him, so he was always seemingly with his son, Jeanie was still around up until his disappearance, it seems. That breaks my heart for Kim. But if you think this case ends here, you're wrong. Because Jeramy's case has been linked and always talked about in comparison with another man that went missing 3 years prior to Jeramy's disappearance. and that is of a man named Ahren Barnard. The 35-year-old was a disc jockey at a dance club and also helped out at a pawn shop located in the Boise Bench neighborhood called Vista Pawn. He was also a gun dealer and loved working with weapons, owning multiple different businesses over the years, including a gun store and a motorcycle shop. According to his family, Ahren had a passion for music, and in school he was part of the orchestra and jazz bands. He also had 2 young children. On December 3rd of 2004, Ahren called his mother Vicky as he cooked pasta for his 3-year-old son, who was playing video games on a computer. As the story always seems to go, nothing seemed off, nothing seemed unusual, and Ahren was talking about plans he had for the next few days. The next day was December 4th, and Ahren ended up doing a scheduled drop-off with his son's mother at a McDonald's off Cole and Overland Roads. He then headed home to his residence off Sutherland Drive. During the drive around 7:15 p.m., Ahren ended up calling a friend named Yvette, who he told he was driving home. During that phone call, his roommate Tyler Dean ended up calling him, and he answered the call. However, it's not really talked about what happened during that phone call, and it's unclear what happened to Ahren after this. Now, Ahren also wouldn't be reported missing right away, his mother Vicky saying, and I quote, "It's my biggest regret, and I'm so ashamed of that. But he was 35 years old," end quote. Now, some strange things ended up happening after Ahren's disappearance, including his roommate Tyler moving multiple items and furniture from Ahren's room, including a desk chair. Now, you may ask why I'm speaking about Ahren's disappearance as well. Well, it turns out that Jeramy and Ahren had a very strange mutual friend, a divorce and family lawyer named Constance Norris, who would end up being interviewed during the investigation into Ahren's disappearance. And it turns out he's very, very good friends with another divorce and family attorney we've talked about today, Miss Jeanie Braun. According to Ahren's mother, Vicky, Constance had actually dated her son for a period of time and also owned a motorcycle shop with him. According to Ada County property records, there was actually a transfer of deed between the two. On top of that, Vicky claims she witnessed Constance sleeping in her son's bed when she went over for Christmas one time. Additionally, both Vicky and Jeramy's mother, Cheryl, both said the 2 lawyers attended a wedding together with Ahren and Jeramy at their sides. And this happened in the early 2000s, so it seems like Jeramy and Ahren may have kind of knew each other as well. However, when the Idaho Press interviewed Constance, she did not want to talk about Ahren. She also stated she didn't know Jeramy. And when Constance was questioned by a YouTube channel called Darkness Northwest, she also denied being not close with Ahren. Very weird that you deny knowing someone that there are apparently legal records showing you owned a business together, and then the person's mother literally claims that you were sleeping in his bed. Like, what? So this is where the theories play in with these cases. How did these 2 alleged boyfriends, these 2 friends, both go missing within a few years of each other? Very odd to say the least. Could this just be some big tragic coincidence? I guess maybe. Or could there be something more here? Now, there's a lot of theories that float around with Ahren and Jeramy's cases that involve a hitman. An anonymous source who apparently worked with Ahren's business claims that a man who was a business partner at Ahren's gun shop was allegedly hired to kill Ahren. Apparently, Ahren had attempted to cut this individual out of a deal that possibly scorned him. The source also believes that the business partner's son, who worked at one of the partner's pawn shops and mountain home, died the same way from knowing too much about something his father was involved in. So essentially the theory is that this man was either very upset with Ahren because of this business deal and the hitman was hired or whatever, and Ahren got wiped out, or Constance hired this hitman, took Ahren out. There was something going on with the business. Ahren got taken out is essentially the theory. Now, how this links to Jeramy is the theory that possibly Jeramy had enough. Maybe that's why he wanted to call his best friend that night. Maybe he was going to tell him, like, I'm going to go break it off with Jeanie. Again, this is all assume, alleged, theory. You get it. I don't know why he would have went and taken out money, though. That's something I don't understand there. But I feel like if he was going to go break up with Jeanie, you'd think he would have told his father. But something happened that night to Jeramy, clearly, in my opinion. Something happened to him. All the family thinks something happened to him that night on the 11th when he went out. Keep in mind, he was dressing nicer. So maybe he was going to meet up with Jeanie that night if he was dressing nicer. But maybe Jeanie had other plans. Maybe Jeanie had been so scorned because Jeramy turned her away. She realized she was never going to fully be with Jeramy and that he was trying to get back together with Kim. So maybe she decided that no one could have him then. And that night, she ended up hiring that hitman that Constance might have known to take Jeramy out as well. And that's kind of where the theories go with these 2 cases. Maybe Jeanie was talking to Constance, heard, it worked out for her a few years prior because Ahren's case is still not solved either, so it worked out really well for her, and she thought, hey, can I use your guy? Because clearly he does a good job, and they took Jeramy out as well. well, what happened to Ahren and Jeramy then, the theory seems to go that they might have been thrown down mine shafts, because according to the anonymous source, those involved in the business also owned mines where Jeramy Burt's last phone call placed, leading to some people to wonder, if they were thrown down those mine shafts. We've heard that talked about a lot in cases also that happen in California and Nevada, like places where there are as well, more mine shafts and stuff in the desert, and people's bodies are never found there either from that. Additionally, there seems to be more links as well between Jeramy and Ahren, because Cheryl said that one year during Christmas, Jeramy had bought a television to give his daughter, and he told her that he had bought it from a pawn shop in the area, which made her suspicious, with the ties surrounding both Ahren and her son's cases as well. Again, it's also theorized that it was Jeanie behind those text messages. I mean, I think you can get where all this is going, as I just said, and that, if it was allegedly Jeanie, she was trying to make the family think that it was Jeramy still on the end of the phone. But if he was going to run off, again, it didn't make sense that he wouldn't talk to his family. He would just run off with nothing. And why wouldn't he answer his phone? Just none of it made sense. He didn't have anything to run off with. But if you do think about it, Jeanie was a lawyer. She would know that if she made it look, allegedly, of course, that Jeramy was still alive, that the police would think that he ran off on his own free will and wouldn't search for him. Think about that for a second. She would know a lot. And clearly, she's not above breaking the law, because she broke it before when she forged a judge's signature and then went to jail for it. So, hey, just saying. And clearly, in my opinion, she was extremely obsessed with Jeramy, to the point that even after he was the one that put her in jail, the only reason she went to jail was because he secretly recorded the phone calls on his own free will because he wanted to take her down. After she got out of jail, she still got back with him. Who the hell does that? Like, that is just absolutely insane. In my opinion, Jeanie was obsessed with him. She was absolutely obsessed. And something very devious and dark was happening here. You'd think if someone put you in jail, you'd want to leave them alone and never see them again. But she did the opposite. She immediately was right back there next to him, following him around, showing up at his house, showing up at his job sites. It's very strange. And I did some more digging into Jeanie, and from a lot of stories, it seems like Jeanie was known as a black widow of sorts. She seemed to have gone over to St. George sometime around before or after Jeramy's disappearance and married a much older lawyer there. There were also countless rumors of her having affairs with other married men as well. It said around 2015 and 2016, the older lawyer that she had married filed for divorce, but he ended up passing away not long after, and his family seemed to not like Jeanie at all because they did not include her in his obituary. On top of that, 3 years ago, an anonymous source would also claim online that they had a recent interaction with Jeanie, claiming, and I quote, "Jeanie worked with me just recently and was let go about a week after the FBI and sheriff came in. She is one of the most insane people I have ever met in my life. She doesn't know how to act normal and over-exaggerates everything. I work in sales, and whenever I made a sale, she would baby me and tell me good job and treat me like a child. It was really weird. She also got into it pretty big with another coworker. She put her name on his sales and delivered a threatening letter to him. None of us knew anything about this, though, and it all came to light after she left. My coworker is now terrified that she is going to come back after him since she already threatened him. We are all kind of just shocked right now." End quote. Clearly, this woman just doesn't obey the law. Now, let's talk about Kim, because Kim would actually go on to marry another man named Jeff Shaw just 3 months after Jeramy disappeared. And the two would go on to have another daughter who she'd name Eliana. But tragically, in 2016, Kim would actually end up passing away after she unalived herself at only 41 years old, leaving Mackenzie now without her father and her mother. Now, Kim is someone else who has been very heavily discussed in the discussion boards and the rumor mill with this case, because it is weird that she was so absolutely in love with Jeramy, yet then remarried just 3 months after he disappeared. It's definitely another strange situation, but again, there's no evidence to say that she was ever involved in Jeramy's disappearance, and she was in Vegas when he disappeared. Unless you want to tie her in to maybe she had a hitman or something, but it is just very weird that she did get married so soon after. But again, he had put her through the ringer, so honestly, I do feel for her. But then on top of that, people have speculated she unalived herself possibly because she was just so overburdened with information she may have known. It's kind of a lot going on with that. And I don't want to touch too much into that because again, we truly don't know what was actually going through her head. On October 1st of 2018, Cheryl would finally legally declare Jeramy dead, saying, and I quote, "He didn't deserve any of this. I never would have thought I would be looking at this many years. I pray for him all the time. I wish he'd send me some signs as to where he's at." End quote. Jeramy's family is still heartbroken and they are still fighting for answers. I can already see the comment section bashing Jeramy for his infidelity. And again, I agree. It's awful. I don't believe in anyone cheating. I believe break up with someone. If you want to be with someone else, don't do that to someone. It's awful. But despite Jeramy's infidelity, he was still a person. He was a father, a brother, a son, a friend, and he still deserves justice because something horrible happened to him, clearly. The car was found burned. There was all those weird text messages, and he was just never seen again. It just doesn't make sense that he would have ran off. Jeramy needs justice, and his family still deserves closure. And so does Ahren's family. Ahren's family does as well. Both also left behind children who don't know what happened to their fathers, who are now in their 20s, and they still don't know. They're adults. And my heart goes out to all of them. I truly hope one day they find closure and they find answers. As of 2 years ago, there are still no more updates on either men's cases. Tragically, there just doesn't seem to be much evidence in either of their cases to figure out what exactly happened here and tie who did this to them. Jeramy's brother Shane saying, and I quote, "I don't mean to downplay death, but this is almost worse. You have all these unanswered questions and it haunts you every day." End quote. As I said in the beginning, I didn't know this case was going to be as wild as it turned out to be. There were so many twists and turns, so many strange characters and situations. But at the end of the day, there are still no answers, and there needs to be. So if you know something, please say something. I'll have the authorities contact down below for both men's cases. And as always, I hope you stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.